There are men so rich they can buy anything in the world except one thing: proof that goodness still exists. Harold Whitfield was one of those men, 78 years old, owner of the largest shipping fleet on the eastern seaboard, with warehouses stretching from Savannah to Norfolk. And yet that afternoon he sat in the study of his Charleston mansion, eyes closed, pretending to sleep, setting a trap of his own design. On the table beside him, an old gold pocket watch and 3 loose $100 bills, left carelessly where anyone who entered the room would see them. He had done this before, more times than he could count, and humanity had never once surprised him. People always took something, always. But that afternoon, the person who walked into the study was not a desperate adult. It was an 8-year-old girl named Ruby Coleman, wearing a coat 2 sizes too big, her sneakers held together with tape. And what she did next would crack something in Harold Whitfield that 20 years of grief had frozen solid. Stay with me, because the ending, what Harold wrote into his final will, left his own children speechless. I've come to believe that bitterness isn't born overnight. It builds slowly, like rust on an old ship, until the whole hull gives way. Harold wasn't born cold. He was made cold by the very people he'd once loved most. Harold wasn't really asleep. His breathing was slow and deliberate. His thin frame settled deep into a leather wingback chair. To anyone watching, he was a tired old man napping in the afternoon sun. But behind his half-closed eyes, he was wide awake, listening, waiting. He called this his honesty test. It was a habit he couldn't quit. Outside, rain tapped softly against the tall windows overlooking the harbor. Inside, a fire popped in the hearth, and a grandfather clock ticked in the corner beneath rows of leather-bound ledgers. Harold had staged the scene carefully, watch and cash both within easy reach, both looking forgotten. He heard the door creak open. Ruby was the daughter of Harold's new housekeeper, Dolores Coleman. Dolores had been working at the estate for barely a month. Her husband had passed the year before in a construction accident, leaving her to raise Ruby alone on a housekeeper's wage. That day was a teacher in-service day, and Dolores had no one to watch her daughter, so she'd begged the estate manager to let Ruby wait quietly in the small sitting room down the hall. "Stay right here on this cushion," Dolores whispered, kneeling in front of her daughter. "Mr. Whitfield is resting in his study. Don't wander in there. Don't touch a single thing in this house. If he wakes up and finds you, we could both lose everything we have. Do you understand me?" "Yes, Mama," Ruby said softly. Harold, still playing his part, felt something shift in his chest at the sound of that voice. It wasn't mischief. It was fear. The fear of a child who already understood how easily her family could lose everything. Dolores kissed her daughter's forehead and hurried off to finish the laundry room. Now it was only Harold and Ruby, 2 rooms apart, until Ruby, curious and restless, wandered down the hallway and pushed open the study door by mistake. There is a detail worth sitting with. Dolores hadn't told her daughter, "Don't steal." She'd said, "Don't touch a single thing." In her mind, her daughter was never a threat. The real danger was a world quick to blame poor children for things they never did. Ruby stood frozen in the doorway of the study, certain she'd made a terrible mistake. But leaving now meant crossing back past the creaky floorboard by the stairs, and she didn't want to wake him. So she stood very still, waiting for her heartbeat to settle. Harold kept his breathing even. He expected the girl to notice the money first. Children always did. He pictured how it would go: small fingers reaching for the bills, stuffing them into a coat pocket, and then he'd wake up, and another lesson would be confirmed: trust no one. But Ruby didn't move toward the money. She was looking at the watch. Slowly, cautiously, she crossed the room, not toward the cash, but toward Harold himself. She stopped beside his chair and studied his face for a long moment. Then, very gently, she reached out and touched 2 fingers to his wrist. Checking his pulse, Harold realized. Not stealing. Checking if I'm still alive. She let go, seemingly satisfied, and let out a small sigh. "Mr. Whitfield," she whispered, barely audible over the rain, "you left your window open." Harold hadn't left it open. The estate manager must have cracked it earlier to air out fireplace smoke. But Ruby, noticing the curtain shifting in the draft, quietly patted across the room and pushed it shut. Then she came back not to the money, but to the pocket watch, balanced at the very edge of the table. She picked it up carefully, turned it over in her small hands, and Harold heard her murmur, "This looks important. It shouldn't be so close to falling." She set it gently in the center of the table, safely away from the edge, then noticed the loose $100 bills beside it. Harold's whole body tensed. Here it comes, he thought. Ruby looked at the money for a long moment. Then she simply straightened the bills into a neat stack, tucked them under the corner of a nearby book so they wouldn't blow away if the window opened again, and walked back toward the door. She never once put her hand toward taking anything. I want to sit with this moment, because there is something an 8-year-old girl understood that a 78-year-old billionaire had long forgotten. Kindness doesn't ask if you deserve it first. Ruby didn't wonder whether the sleeping man was rich or cruel or worth the trouble. She saw an open window, a watch about to fall, money about to scatter, and she simply fixed what needed fixing. Harold lay there, mind-reeling. He had built a test to catch a thief. What he caught instead was a caretaker. Before he could process it, an old memory surfaced, one he'd buried for 2 decades. His wife, Margaret, in a hospital bed, in the final weeks of her illness, her voice thin as paper. "Don't let this turn you hard, Harold," she'd whispered. "Promise me you won't let grief make you cold." He had promised. He had not kept that promise. Their 2 children hadn't come to say goodbye. One was closing a deal in Zurich, the other was on a yacht off Capri. They called 4 days after the funeral to ask about the estate. From that day forward, Harold built walls. He tested everyone, fired people over suspicion alone, and until this rainy afternoon, everyone had failed his test right up until Ruby. The study door swung open, and Dolores rushed in, breathless, her face pale with panic. She'd realized Ruby had wandered off. Her eyes swept the room and landed first on her daughter standing calmly near the bookshelf, then on Harold in his chair, apparently still asleep, then on the watch and money sitting untouched on the table. Dolores' stomach dropped. In her mind, the worst possibility bloomed instantly. Ruby had gone through his things, touched what she shouldn't have, and Dolores was about to lose the only job keeping a roof over their heads. "Ruby," she hissed, grabbing her daughter's hand. "What did you touch? Why were you in here?" "I didn't take anything, Mama," Ruby said, eyes wide. "His window was open and it was cold, so I closed it. And his watch was about to fall off the table, so I moved it. That's all. I promise." "Oh, Lord," Dolores whispered, tears springing to her eyes. "He's going to wake up and think." She didn't finish the sentence. She simply reached for the watch to put it back exactly where it had been, hands trembling. There is a cruelty worth naming here. Dolores was terrified because of the very trait she'd worked hardest to raise in her daughter: carefulness, thoughtfulness, the instinct to fix what's broken instead of walking past it. She had taught Ruby to be good, and now goodness itself felt like a danger. Harold, still pretending, felt the weight of that fear radiating off Dolores like heat from the fireplace. This wasn't the fear of someone guilty. It was the fear of a mother standing at the edge of losing everything because of her child's decency. And Harold understood, in that instant, an uncomfortable truth. He was the one who had built a world where kindness felt dangerous, not through cruelty exactly, but through decades of suspicion that had taught the people around him that trust was a trap waiting to spring. He couldn't lie still any longer. He let out a slow groan and shifted in the chair, as if only now waking. Dolores froze, pulling Ruby protectively behind her. Harold blinked his eyes open, feigning grogginess, and looked at the 2 of them standing by the door. "What's all this commotion?" he said gruffly. "In my own study, Mr. Whitfield." "I am so sorry," Dolores said quickly, bowing her head. "My daughter wandered in. She meant no harm, I swear it. We'll leave right now. Please, I need this position, sir." Harold's gaze moved to the table, the watch centered safely, the bills stacked neatly beneath the book. Then to Ruby, who was trembling now, not from cold, but from fear of what came next. He reached out and picked up the watch, turning it slowly in his fingers. "Young lady," he said. Ruby peeked out from behind her mother's skirt. Yes, sir? Come here. Dolores's grip tightened. Sir, she didn't mean any. Come here, Harold repeated, more gently this time. Ruby stepped forward on shaking legs and stopped in front of his chair. Harold leaned down, closer to her level than he had leaned toward anyone in a very long time. Why did you move my watch? Harold asked quietly. Because it was going to fall, Ruby said. My daddy used to say broken things are harder to fix than things you catch in time. Harold's throat tightened. And the money? You didn't think to take it? Ruby tilted her head, confused by the question. It wasn't mine. 4 words. Harold Whitfield, who had built an empire on contracts and clauses and the assumption that everyone had a price, sat in silence, undone by a child who had simply told the truth. He didn't fire Dolores that day. He didn't so much as raise his voice. Instead, he asked Ruby to sit by the fire. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, Harold Whitfield had a real conversation about her school. Her favorite subject, math, she said, because numbers don't lie to you. And her father, who used to fix boat engines down at the harbor before the accident. Over the following months, something in the house changed. Harold stopped hiding tests around the estate. He started having breakfast in the kitchen instead of alone in his study. He paid for Ruby's school supplies without being asked. Then her tuition at a better school. Then, quietly, without telling anyone, set up a trust in her name. 3 years later, Harold Whitfield passed away peacefully in the very same study. The fire still burning, rain still tapping the windows. His children arrived within the week, already discussing the estate before the funeral flowers had wilted. They gathered in a downtown law office for the reading of the will, expecting the fleet, the warehouses, the accounts. The attorney read through the standard bequests, trusts for the grandchildren, donations to the Maritime Museum, funds for the dock workers' pension. Then came the final clause. To Ruby Coleman, the attorney read, in recognition of the only honesty I ever tested that didn't fail a full scholarship trust through graduate school, and 40% ownership in Whitfield Shipping, to be held until her 18th birthday. The room went silent. Harold's son finally spoke. Who is Ruby Coleman? No one in the family could answer. But somewhere across town, an 11-year-old girl sat at her kitchen table, still turning an old gold pocket watch over in her hands, a gift Harold had given her the day he finally opened his eyes in every sense that mattered.